Edit Me Mondays are where I look back at old projects I've created for clients and explain my process and workflow. I'm a senior editor here at Redline Studios Post Department in New York City, and cutting all kinds of projects for the past 2 decades, I've really seen it all. Hopefully, in revisiting these projects of the past, I can help you with any edits you might have in the present or future. Today, we're taking a look back at Survive or Die. This project was brought to me by a producer I worked with quite often. The premise of this one was pretty simple. It's a survival show where people are dropped into an extremely rough terrain and all they have to do is get out of it. Now, in terms of footage, all I had to work with was some stock and a Skype interview. This tape is very similar in context, execution, and deliverables to one we've already looked at weeks ago called Drake Passage. The first thing I did on this edit was I looked at every single frame of footage that I have. Most editors, I feel like, do not do this. You kind of scrub and blow through things. I always take my time. I want to know every piece of footage that I have because I might have to request more or a reshoot or additional stock footage. Now, most of the imagery that I scrubbed through and saw on the hard drive was absolutely silent because most of it was stock. So I knew immediately that one thing I wanted to bring to this tape was not only something that hit your eyes, but hit your ears from a very sensory standpoint. One thing I've learned as an editor is that sound is more important than picture. Yes, that might be shocking to many people, but think about it. If you are watching a poorly shot image, maybe it's a little bit out of focus, maybe the color isn't right, that becomes forgivable because most people's eyes are not perfect. Most people don't see in HD, but when it comes to hearing, something that doesn't sound right is going to hit an audience member much harder. So, bad audio gets noticed way more than bad video. Bad video is forgivable, bad audio really isn't. Let's take a look at the sound design in this tape first. Pretty intense, and that's exactly how I wanted it. Now, my sound design process is very specific. Nothing, I mean nothing is recycled. Nothing is used as is. I do pull from stock libraries, but nothing gets used verbatim. What do I mean by that? Everything is manipulated. Speeds, pitch, frequency, layering until it becomes my own. So, something as simple as wind is never used as its own self in the tape. I am going to take 5 different wind tracks, mix them, reverse them, speed some up, slow some down, change the pitch to some to create an entirely new singular wind sound. This is an approach that I have done for years now, and it works tremendously at giving your tape its own identity while still feeling familiar. For this tape, I wanted to create full, lush sound landscapes where one specific sound might emerge like an exclamation point inside of a plethora of other noises that you might be hearing as the audience member. So, as you listen to it, you're going to hear this abundance of sound, and then you're going to hear one sound effect kind of cut through at certain moments, sometimes timed out with graphics, just to add a little bit of that punctuation mark I'm talking about. I started with breaths and whooshes. I also love mixing sound effects and atmosphere and music together until they become interwoven in one. What do I mean by that? Sometimes, as an audience member, you might hear something that sounds like a whoosh, but then it merges into a breath and then it merges into wind. So it almost takes on the life of multiple categories of sound. It could be a sound effect that becomes atmosphere that then becomes dialogue. You hear something, you think you recognize it, and then it bleeds into something else in a very transitional way. A human breath becomes a whoosh. That whoosh becomes wind. The wind becomes the acceleration of a motor vehicle. All of those things might be separate elements, but I bleed them, merge them, fade them into one another so one sound carries into the next. And it kind of creates this sensory overload in a good way. The sound design also creates fullness and at times emptiness. Hearing only a frog in a massive jungle can feel haunting and sparse. Choosing when to be loud and when to be quiet, especially when mixing in text graphics, is deliberate and intentional, and when done right, very effective. I won't layer 10 sounds when you're trying to read something. That's about understanding the psychology of the audience. So when we have these text moments pop up in this tape that has all of this immersive sound, I might start to duck those sounds and really limit them to be more sparse. That way, it gives your mind a little bit of time to analyze the text, read what's important content, but still hear a little bit of that atmosphere and environment. Then, when text and graphics leave you, you're going to get hit and immersed with full sounds that bring you back into the environment of the tape. Now, as an editor, you have to learn what you can do and when you should do it and how it affects the viewer. For example, graphics. Short words are better. Don't turn your text into a novella. With imagery, video clips, I have found that you only need about a second of screen time for a strong image to really resonate and be absorbed by the viewer. Now, especially if it's a close-up and easily identifiable. Sometimes when you have a big, broad, wide shot, that often needs a little bit more time to linger so the eye can examine and explore it in its entirety. You have to understand as an editor when to play with the idea of flashing an image and when to hold on one. By the time I had cut this tape, I had developed a pretty recognizable style that was aggressive, immersive, and in your face. And when the client came to me, they were aware of that and they really wanted that brand to kind of sit in their tape. And it's kind of how I got the job. So it's almost like, hey, listen, you're the right editor for this project because we want this big, bold, immersive, in your face cut. Now let's take a look at the graphics. There are moments where it is just simple text on screen that are a little more longer in the tooth and also allowed to play out more on screen so that they can be read. For the shorter version of the text, they are small words and they are a little bit more creative because we can play with them and kind of splash them up on screen in a non-conventional way. If you look closely, there are some really nice quick edit techniques here behind these mortise style graphics where the images change inside the text. I remember knowing that if I was going to put text over fire, I needed extremely tight close-ups of flames to fill those shapes. It's almost like using textiles that complement your footage. I should also explain how I actually created those graphics. I built all of these in Photoshop. I used very fat, wide fonts, knowing ahead of time that I needed enough room inside the letters for video to live behind them. The design choice was really about leaving negative space for imagery to bleed through, making kind of a double meaning, right? You have the word and that you can take literally, but then you have the shapes and textures behind it to kind of add again to that immersive feel of where are you in place and time and what is this environment. This tape was so much about environment. And so I'm going to use every moment in the tape that I can to sell that. Yes, even in a moment of simple, boring text. If I can bleed through environmental tones, it's going to happen. So back to how it gets executed. Now I want you to picture these texts on black with white ink in the fill of the letters. So what I do then is I remove the white, I cut out the black of the frame, leaving only the letter shapes as transparency, right? So they're essentially a hole in the video frame. Then I export them as PNG files with alpha channel. Now, I know there are ways to achieve this very same look directly inside Premiere using the text tool, but I do prefer to use Photoshop. I feel like it gives me a small, clean PNG file and it doesn't bog down the edit or slow the timeline down. And I do like that separation. I don't like doing every single thing inside the non-linear editing software, no matter what I'm using. I want that tangible file that I can bring in. I know what it is. It's its own standalone thing, and I do that intentionally. Now, the only real drawback to operating like that is resizing. Because if you think about it, the black space behind the text is literally baked into the frame. So if I want to scale this graphic down and make it smaller, you're going to start to see the edge of that black border. So it is something that you have to consider if you're going to take this same route in designing text and these fonts in Photoshop versus in Premiere itself, where you have a little bit more constant control of the file versus the Photoshop style, where you kind of are then constrained where something is baked into the PNG. Overall, that workflow gave me exactly what I wanted: bold, aggressive typography with moving images living behind the actual text. One thing I do always say is never treat the footage you're given as the final limit. It is merely a starting point. Add stock. Ask for test shots. Ask for what the client thinks is bad footage. I can't tell you how many times people say, well, you don't need to see this folder. It's full of bad shots. And then I go in there and I find tons of things that I can use in ways that the client just wasn't anticipating. Sometimes it can be simply like this, like a textile. What I'm trying to get at is, as an editor, you're always trying to read your footage and interpret it in ways that might not initially been the intent. Shots where a subject or something might cross the frame could become a natural wipe. Moments where exposures shift, where things go too dark or too bright, might end up being a nice transition. Even a camera operator adjusting the exposure in the middle of a take, ramp the speed, flash cut to white, and suddenly you've created an in-camera effect that was always there, just not maybe as recognizable from the get. After the opening, just under 1 minute, we go into a biopack on the main talent.
My name is Ian Craddock, British Special Forces. I spend about 250 days a year in the jungle.
The rain has started.
I run a company called Bushmasters, which is based in Guyana. I've been doing it for 15 years. We do survival and adventure courses, extreme adventure.
That's where we're going down.
In development tapes, name dropping matters. Executives love it and it adds perceived value. Notice how the pacing here also slows down. It's still fast, but not like the opening, and that's intentional. The opening sells an environment that is active, dangerous, fast, and furious. This section now is selling a person, so it needs to have a little bit of more breathing room and settle in and let us really understand who is this and why are they important. A small note about the score here. It's a track from Metallica from the film Mission Impossible 2.
My name is Ian Craddock, British Special Forces. I spend about 250 days a year in the jungle.
If you think about that film, it's dangerous, it's stunts, it's extremities. So don't underestimate music with pop culture memory baked into it. Even subconsciously, people associate this track with danger, risk, and action, and so it fits perfectly. As we get into this tape, there's a bridge section here that explains the format and it slows things down again. We show dangerous environments, but with longer sweeping shots. This is all about balance and pacing. Like a DJ, you can't play the same song or genre back to back forever. You gotta mix it up. A little bit of slow music, something that makes you want to dance, something with sentiment, something with aggression. You gotta have a good playlist. Let's take a look at these sound ups, as we like to call them, or moments of verite in the tape.
Right here we have the water vine, which is great for drinking water.
All they have is the things that are on their back.
This is the net that Dean has been weaving.
They are all ripped from other survival shows, not ours, obviously, because it hasn't been filmed yet. Now, using clips like this as an editor does create a technical challenge because you're working with unclean audio. Sometimes it's got music in it, sometimes It's mixed tracks where it's got multiple people talking over one another, and so you have to find ways to work around it. Overall, I think this was a really strong tape, and like any rip tape, it's limited by borrowed footage. So the trick is making it feel like it isn't borrowed and letting it guide the creative direction. What I'm most proud about this tape, I will admit, is the opening scene with the graphics, the integration of text, and the sound design. It really captures you, and every time I've played this for any audience member, network executive, or just average Joe, they immediately respond to that open, and that shows it's working. It grabs your attention, and you have to think in this space, this is the world of development. Executives are looking at 10, 20, maybe 30 tapes a day. You have to find a way to make yours jump out of the screen, grab them, and say, look at me, I'm better than every other tape you're going to see today. I hope you enjoyed this Edit Me Monday, where I took a look back at an old project for a client to discuss the process that went into making the cut. Every edit we break down here is also available to screen in its entirety on our website at www.redlinestudios.net. Do you have an old edit or a current one you're working on that you'd like my thoughts on? Send it to me, and I'll feature it here on a future Edit Me Monday video.